Hey, how's everybody doing today? I wanted to get on here and just ask you a few questions, something to think about, something to consider, because I've been considering these things and they don't really seem to make sense from a logical standpoint or perspective. And one of the first things I want you to consider is the cancer industry. Now, I'm not going to give you any medical advice or I'm not a doctor or anything like that. This is just purely from a how should I say speculative consideration. This is just something I've just pondered. So take it for what it's worth. So the cancer industry been around for decades, billions of trillions of dollars funneled through these organizations that claim to be wanting to find a cure. More people than ever are suffering from different types of cancers, even children and so forth. And with all of the resources and funding and everything else going through these organizations, they can't find a cure. More and more treatments that tend to make people go bankrupt and not only destroy their lives health wise, but also financially, even if they have insurance. And so uh, that's one example. And then, not to mention uh, practices like Gerson, Dr. Gerson, that came up with the Gerson method, I think is what it's considered or called. And unfortunately, to my knowledge, he's no longer with us. But his daughter is practicing the trade or the craft, the practice out of Mexico because that particular approach to healing the body was outlawed, I guess, in the country. So they were forced to move out. Anyways, I mean, there's a whole plethora of reasons for that, and I'm not going to get into that. You can look it up yourself and make up your own mind as to why they were forced to operate out of Mexico and not allowed to operate on U.S. soil. So let's see another example: mental health industry. Um, More and more psychoactive drugs are being used in the through the mental health departments of medical facilities and so forth. Um, these drugs are actually causing a lot of chemical imbalances and other issues. And even though, like for example, it's almost a contradiction because even doctors admit themselves that a lot of these antidepressants, um, it even says in the warning labels that they could lead to more depression. So it just if yeah, I don't want to get into that. So anyways, just think about these things. More and more people are suffering from mental health issues than ever. More and more people are suffering from the thoughts of suicide and suicidal attempts, and even attempting and what's the word, completing it, I guess. So these issues are getting worse and worse and worse in society, but they're not. It should be the opposite of what's happening. See, with all of this focus, hyper focus, and all these resources and all this funding that's put into these efforts, there should be a payoff, I guess, for lack of better terms. I hate to use those terms because we're talking about people's lives and it sounds petty when you're talking about payoffs, but there should be a result. Like, for example, if I use my kitchen to make food and uh, I don't clean up after myself, eventually, if I do that multiple times, the kitchen will get so dirty that I can't use it any longer, and I will be forced to clean up. And as I clean up and make the effort of cleaning the kitchen, if I stop at points along the way and look at the kitchen, I'll be able to see the effort, the results of my effort. I'll be able to see that the kitchen is becoming cleaner. And eventually the kitchen will become clean again. And as long as I stay on top of the messes that I make and clean up after myself, the kitchen won't get to the point to where it's so out of control that I can't really use the kitchen any longer. Um, but for some reason, people in these industries, I guess, can't see the forest for the trees. And the kitchen just keeps getting dirtier and dirtier. And with all of these efforts, nothing seems to really be effective. But we just keep going through the motions, I guess. It doesn't make sense to me when I put it in this perspective. So uh, Another example is law enforcement. Look at our communities. Now, granted, I'm not in fear for my life when I drive down the street because I think a thug is going to shoot me or I'm going to get robbed or anything like that. I'm confident in the fact that every time I go out, I'm not going to be attacked by a quote unquote criminal. Um, However, there are some exceptions to that rule, but I won't get into that. Um, I've seen the videos. I mean, the evidence is there, and in society in general, and things are definitely getting more violent. And see, like the police departments, law enforcement, go back say 100 years, and regardless of the semantics of the situations and the ins and outs of the time compared to today, I'm not interested in that. Just in that time, for what it's worth, the protocols that were in place to not just from the establishment, if you will, or from the government, but that people self-governed and had the ability to act like adults. Um, and so it was a different era. But nowadays, it seems that people are very childish and immature, and it's easier to just throw a temper tantrum and apologize rather than act mature and work through the thing. Um, and this is something that I experienced firsthand. If you've been following this channel at all, these postings, these recordings. So, anyways, to make a long story short, the law enforcement's been around for how long now, and things are just getting more and more out of control. It almost seems like in these industries, it's a means to an end. It's a way to make money because every one of these industries that I've mentioned, there is billions of dollars being made across the board, not necessarily in each individual location or facility, but across the board. If you consider in every county, at the county level, there's a sheriff's department that has a control of a jail and the court system, and that's even at the municipal level too. All the municipalities, for the most part, have the ability, unless they're just entirely too small to have the ability, then they pass it on to the next biggest municipality that has the capability to process, through the courts, that has the court systems and that sort of thing. But look, this whole system that's been around for how long now, and things now are so far out of control that things being done are considered crimes when there's not even an actual crime being committed, because for the crime to be committed, there has to be a victim. And a majority of these so-called crimes that people are being charged with are victimless crimes. There's no injured party. No one got hurt. No property was damaged or stolen or anything like that. But there's charges regardless. So it's a means to an end. And think of it this way: if you were able to write on a piece of paper that someone owed you money and give it to them, and they accepted it and paid you, and that happened so many times, and then even if it was arbitrary, even if it wasn't even lawful, but people paid anyways, do you think the person writing the piece of paper stating that someone owes them money, do you think that they would stop doing that, or do you think that would make them do that more? Just ask yourself that question, because it's empowering. See, when a thief gets away with stealing something, they tend to steal bigger things. This is well known. This is documented. The research into how these people think, and it's not, everybody doesn't think the same, but generally speaking, this is well known as far as the research into this type of psychology, and it's empowering when people do bad things and get away with it. They tend to do worse things to more people. It's almost like a multiplier, if you want to think of it in that context. So I wanted you all to think about these things that what's the point of having these systems in place if they're not actually providing or completing, what's the word? I guess providing is a good word. Providing the results that not only that they tout is what they're, I guess, promising, but it's the whole purpose, it's the whole reason behind their existence in the first place in that capacity. But it seems to be an opposite. It almost seems like I had mentioned, it almost seems like the more focus on these issues, the worse it gets. Because I'm not going to lie, I mean, I've seen some crazy people out and about. When I'm out and about, I've seen some people walking down the street screaming at the sky. Who knows what they're going through? Who knows if they're actually crazy? Who knows? Maybe they're just going through a tough moment and they're just venting some frustration and they don't have anybody to talk to. Who knows what their situation is? All I know is that, say, 10, 20 years ago, depending on the area that you're in, that I was in, I should say, that sort of thing was a lot more few and far in between, if you will. And it was usually only like in the city centers where it's extremely, what's the term? Congested. And that's where I would see these types of things typically is in like the city centers. But now I'm seeing these things almost everywhere here and there. Not all the time, but occasionally. And they're becoming more and more frequent. And that could be for a lot of reasons. I mean, not to mention, I mean, for holy cow, the drug use. I mean, going back to the 50s and 60s, you look at the documentation of the experiments from like the CIA and other government groups on the population using psychotropic drugs and things like LSD. And just the drug trade in general and how people have chosen to destroy their lives with some of these drugs and substances and so forth. And although that's their choice, if that's what they choose, then who am I to stop them in doing what they're doing? It's not my place. Now, if they start affecting me, if they come to my property and start stealing my property or attacking me, trying to steal from me to support their habit, that's a whole different story. But I don't want to get off on these side tangents. I want to try to stay focused on the main topic. So, and the main topic being for you all to consider that with many of these systems and institutions in place, are they actually providing the results that they're promising to provide or have promised to provide? Or is it a false promise, a false presentment? Was it an offer that was provided under false pretenses? Maybe it had a good intention in the beginning, and then at some point it was corrupted and used against we the people. And although, like I said, there is some good that's done, it doesn't justify all the bad that is done just to do the little bit of good. It'd be kind of like fishermen in the ocean trying to catch salmon for sale, for production purposes, for food, for our food supply. But instead of catching a lot of salmon, they end up catching a ton of dolphins, and they only catch a few salmon. And it'd be like saying, well, it's worth the sacrifice of all the dolphins so we can get the few salmon, so we can put the salmon in the food supply. The logic just doesn't make sense, because that would never happen. Because it's illogical. It's hazardous. So at that point, using that analogy, there would have to be a different approach to not catch so many dolphins. And this is something that's happened in the industry. So that's why I use that example. So this is just something I want you all to think about and to consider if you haven't. And if you have, then let me know your thoughts. Let's have a conversation about it. I'm all about having conversations. I just don't like when people come at me with all kinds of crazy ridiculous comments, tell me I don't think, tell me I don't know what I'm talking about. They don't explain themselves. They don't put their thoughts out there. They don't put their ideas out there for a debate. No, they just sit back and judge and throw out a little trolling comment, probably to be funny or for attention. But this is the extent of it. I haven't found many people that I can have an actual conversation with about these topics. Let me rephrase that. Have an adult conversation about these topics. And that someone won't be offended at a perspective or an idea that's presented for a conversation. Because, this day and age, people are just way too overly sensitive. And, it's almost like walking on ice or eggshells to have a conversation with people, because you're always going to be worried about if they're going to be triggered or overly sensitive about a topic. It's like, let's just be able to talk it out instead of people being triggered and offended at a word or an idea or a concept, and they just snap and they just shut down and get violent. Like that doesn't solve any problems. That just shows a level of immaturity from the person that's getting violent, because they can't process the information. So then it's like a child dropping into the ground and throwing a temper tantrum and slamming their hands and kicking their feet into the ground and screaming and yelling and shaking their head back. It's the same thing. It's a temper tantrum, because they haven't developed the ability to think for themselves and learn how to educate themselves properly. They haven't been educated properly. They act like spoiled brats and throw temper tantrums. And so this happens all too often nowadays, because people aren't taught to be mature. So that's a whole nother side topic. But yeah, so think about it. All of these industries, and I just named 3. You can come up with more, I'm sure. Think about the industry that's created. Think about the problem that they claim to want to solve. Think about whether or not they actually solved that problem, and also think about the end result. What did they actually do to help that problem? Or did they in fact not help the problem? Did they actually end up making it worse? Or did they contribute to making it worse? You see, these are the things that we need to consider, because it's this sort of thing. I've said it before, beliefs are the enemy of truth. And others have said, Crow777radio.com, they mentions belief is the enemy of knowledge. It's these beliefs that these systems, these institutions are doing what they're put in place supposedly, or the popular misconception of what they're supposedly meant to do, but not actually providing the end result. Because like any business, depending on what the intention of the business is, would determine if it's successful or not. And I guess in this perspective, or from let me back up. In this example, it would depend on the perspective, because from we the people's perspective, for the most part, and I don't want to act like I'm talking or speaking on behalf of everyone, but I think I can safely say that, when considering law enforcement, we like to think of law enforcement as an institution or a organization that is supposed to provide help, protect and serve the public, the community. But it seems like they're not always doing that. They don't always have the community's, the people's best interest at heart when doing the things that they do. And if you're in that sort of organization, then from that perspective, it would seem successful, because they think they're institutionalized. They think that they're doing what they should be doing. They're bringing in the bad guys. They're getting paid. They're making money for the municipality or the county or whatever, state or federal government. So they're doing their part, but they can't see it from the general population's perspective. And so I don't want to get off on another sidebar, but just think about these things. Are these institutions, are these organizations actually providing the results that they are claiming to provide at any given point, even if it's a not necessarily the end result, but even if there should be progress. Like I said, we should be able to see that the kitchen is being cleaned. At some point, the piles of dishes should be lowering, and we should be able to see that there's less dirty dishes on the counter. But instead, it's not that way. It just keeps getting messier, and now you can't even see the kitchen. You can't even see if there's counters there. You can't even get to the sink to be able to clean because it's such a mess. But yet we've got all of these people working in all of these industries, working in all of these organizations and companies and corporations and businesses, getting paid to supposedly help. But it just seems like it's a waste of time because it's not helping the big picture. It's just helping them in the moment get paid, and they can make money off of the situation. What's that phrase? Excuse me. Don't let a good crisis go to waste, I think is what I heard. I heard someone mention that. I haven't been able to verify it, but there was someone, I think it came from someone in the government, had mentioned something to that effect. And it's just another example, or like I mentioned before, problem, reaction, solution. They create the problem, or they allow the problem to persist or exist. They wait for the reaction for people to be detrimentally affected by the problem. And then they provide a solution, which typically isn't in the best interest of the people being affected. It's in the best interest of the people that are that have the control of the situation. Not because of it's right or anything like that, just simply because of the fact that people believe, and let's face it, there's strength in numbers. They've got a whole army. Apparently, as I witnessed, as I experienced, if you try to tell these people that, hey, you might not be doing the right thing, well, of course they don't want to hear that. They'll threaten your life. They might try to kill you, as I found out when I tried to get them to do their jobs. But I guess what their idea of their jobs is different than what the state codes and even the municipal codes outline. So it's just funny how their idea is different than what is actually written and authorized by the legislature, because that's what actually controls them, is, well, supposed to anyways, the legislature, because these codes and statutes, and for the most part, predominantly apply to these public servants, these persons. That's what it is. Don't take my word for it. Look it up yourself. Look up the definition of person, and then define all of those words. It's as simple as that. The only word that could come even close, possibly, in the definition of person to a man or a woman is individual, but even individual, it's still referring to a corporation, because essentially what it's referring to as an individual is a sole corporation, sole proprietorship. These are all business terms. It's all commerce. Corporations, it's all dead speak, dead talk. Well, I've been taught since I was a kid, and I've come to realize that dead men tell no tales. So these corporations, these corporate fictions, they don't have a voice. They don't have standing, period.